बोले सोने हाल सासरी अकाल।
My name is Manjeet Kaur.
And my name is Pranam Singh.
Welcome to the One Show. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Welcome to a very special, very challenging One Show today. Issue that many families, many communities find difficult to discuss. And that's about mixed race families, mixed race children. And the context, the context here for the discussion, as you all know, is the announcement last week that Meghan Markle, who is an African-American mixed race actress from Los Angeles, is to marry Prince Harry from the House of Windsor, from the royal family. And even just today, if you're watching the news, they actually went to Nottingham for their first public walkabout, and there were huge crowds. And what was really interesting about that was that there were like lots of different communities there, from different backgrounds,
different race,
and universally, I think, you know, everybody who I've spoken to, and if you look at the news, has welcomed this. They said they're pleased, and people are looking forward to the royal wedding. But of course, you know, this is something different, isn't it? You know, this is the first time that the royal family, which represents a particular idea of Britishness or Englishness, has openly, well, that's what we're told by the media, embraced somebody who is from a different racial background. And you know, today we will be discussing what that means for our own sense of identity. What does it mean for when we think about who is British, what is English? But also, in a more wider sense, we're going to be talking about the fact, the reality, the truth that you know, mixing is increasing, particularly maybe among certain social classes, professional groups. And if we look at some of the census data, we find that the mixed ethnicity category now is the largest ethnic group in this society. So the question is, you know, are we seeing the creation of new ethnic groups, or are we just simply seeing what has happened throughout centuries in human beings, which is that we have a tendency to mix? Are attitudes towards mixing changing? You know, are the attitudes towards mixed race? I know that when I grew up, you know, we used to talk about half caste and very derogatory terms. And
the words we used to use.
Right. And of course, within the South Asian community, Punjabi community, but all South Asian, there's a big issue of caste as well. You know, recently we've had anti-caste legislation being brought into the country. There's still a campaign going on. And we know that, you know, if you look on the matrimonial pages, still caste seems to be a big issue.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
But on the other hand, we do find that, you know, young people, maybe who educated professionals, are putting these issues to one side. And, you know, some people might think that today's program is about encouraging. It's not. What we've got today is sociologists and activists. It's about understanding the changes that society is taking place, and you know, all change isn't good change. Change always presents a challenge for us, not least because we still live in a very racist society, and you know, sometimes belonging to a community can give you a sense of security and safety. So there are lots of issues. Today we're just going to scratch the surface.
Definitely we are.
But we will be, you know, discussing some difficult things. But as I said, Manjeet, the kind of context to this show is Harry and Meghan's imminent wedding. And we've just got a short 2-minute video clip for you to see, which is really it brings out some of the issues. So let's watch the clip, and then after that we'll get on with the discussion. series of slides to see they care about Meghan Markle from her childhood to the present moment. Very interesting how she's navigated and negotiated her own racial identity. Of course, in the video, Manjeet, reveals that her father is a white person, and her mother is from mixed background. Although her mother, has declared herself as being black, a social worker. So, and then it raises issues about Meghan's own kind of journey and how she positioned herself. So, I'm going to introduce our guest now, and then we'll get on with the show. But just one other thing: we are on Facebook Live. So, if you're wanting to share thoughts or raise a question, then if you go on Facebook, if I get an opportunity, I will share some of those.
And we will be opening the calls halfway through the show as well, so please call in.
After the break as well, we'll take some calls. So let's introduce our guests. If we start off from my right, there's a strong Coventry contingent here today. We've got Kulwinder Kaur Sandhu. Kulwinder is currently finishing off a PhD at Coventry, and actually she's looking at mixed relationships and issue of domestic violence. But she's a community development worker, and Kulwinder herself, as she will share, is from a mixed background as well, and she can share her own experiences. And with Kulwinder, we've got Dr. Geraldine Brown. She's a research fellow at Coventry University, and Geraldine's specialism is in the field of race and gender and class, so she can come at this from all angles. So welcome, Geraldine, to the show. Jesse Kabiat, we'll start off with a regular, my friend and mentor, maybe even Dr. Harish Malhotra from Birmingham University. Harish is a social work academic, he's a writer, and he's an activist, and his specialist area is around race discrimination. And last but not least, we've got Ravi Kumar, another good friend of mine. Ravi is from the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance. And again, it says on the tin that Ravi is an activist in the whole field of caste discrimination. And of course, although here we're talking about interrace, there's all the question of intercaste within this South Asian context as well, and these issues overlap. So welcome to everybody. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Kindi, I'd like to start off with you first. First of all, welcome to the One Show, and it's great to have you back again. It's really good.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So when you heard let's talk about when you heard the news about Harry and Meghan, what sort of feelings did you have?
I think I was quite surprised, to be honest. I was not expecting any potential member of the royal family to not be white. Although I knew obviously about the relationship between Harry and Meghan, I wasn't expecting it to to become an engagement and with the potential to be married. So I was surprised, I have to admit. And I think especially in light of the kind of political backdrop that we're seeing with nationalism as well, I was surprised.
So you were surprised?
Yes.
Okay. So, go on.
Yeah, Geraldine, I mean, Kindi said that she was surprised. I'm sure there were... I mean, I was actually quite pleased that, I thought, here's progress. What was your reaction?
I didn't think here's progress, but everyone likes a happy story, and as Kindi said, we're living in some really interesting and kind of chaotic times at the moment. So I think everyone's looking for something to grasp, to hold some sort of hope. So I thought it was a beautiful story, and on a personal level, we love who we love, and I just sort of like to say congratulations and wish them all the best. So I think there's a personal aspect and the political aspect, and the personal aspect is, people have the right to choose where they can, and I think it's a nice story. So I wasn't surprised, because I probably have more time than you doing your PhD, Kindi, and follow things through the media. But
but it's interesting you say that in a sense, although we see this as a new story, it's actually an old story, isn't it? It's a Cinderella story. It's the the outsider coming in. And I know that Diana was an insider, but she was also seen as. So are we just replaying a story that's there, feeding an imagination, but the reality is different?
I think it just feeds a certain sort of narrative,
romantic,
doesn't it? Yeah. So you know, someone who's managed to capture that prince, and it's telling that sort of fairy tale that a lot of people still find appealing, and yes, so in that sense, it is quite a lovely story, and you know, as I said, I was quite pleased actually, and like many others, watched quite a number of news reports, and was quite interested in hearing about her story.
Yeah.
So Harish, what sort of thoughts you went through when you heard the news about Meghan and Harry?
I was extremely pleased actually.
Yeah. Why was you so so pleased?
I think the one thing we need to be very clear about is that the people who got different skin color, they got the same emotions, they got the same sentiments, and the same physical and emotional needs and other needs. So why there should be a difference? And also, I think race is defined by the sociologists and academics.
Yeah.
There's only one race, which is called human race. So I think if people have got a love with each other, then there shouldn't be any barrier at all. This is the way I think should be, and I was pleased in that sense. And if it comes from, particularly from the royal family, I'm more pleased that it is coming from the so-called top class, if you use the word class. Yeah. So in that sense, but in the context of Asian, I think Asian families, I think there's still a lot of prejudice against mixed marriages, even the marriages between the two different castes and different religion, different nationality and different skin color. And that happens most of the time in this country, and a number of murders have happened because of that in this country. And I think we need to look at that critically, where we're going and which is the actual goal. And coming from, again, sorry, just taking a bit more time, coming from the social work background, I think we social workers, as Granavaki knows, and other people who are involved in this, we used to call them mixed parentage rather than called mixed race, because there's a euphemism.
But Harish, okay, you brought the social work issue, we will explore, but social workers were also against placing, you know, say black children in white families or Sikh children, non-Sikh families. So social workers were, and even the Children Act itself, was saying that you have to mix racial or religious backgrounds. So there is a kind of
I think the thinking now always changes. As you know, that when I was social worker 20 or 30 years ago, I think thinking at the time was totally different. We tried to actually match the identity so that the race
often they'll have identity crisis.
Again, I understand that the majority of the children who are from mixed parentage, they are being excluded disproportionately very high, and children who come into mental health care, they're also disproportionately very high. And the children actually who are in schools on the whole, mixed parentage category is very high. But I think the future of the situation in that sense is that more than 30% of marriages in Asian communities, they are mixed parentages.
30%?
30%, more than 30%.
So what is the source? Because that's a huge
number.
That is, yes, because many our young people, they're getting married with a different caste. And people have started accepting because there's no other way out.
Ravi, I mean, Harish quoted some phenomenal figures, and I don't know, we probably haven't got any figures on inter-caste marriage. I suspect it's, you know, it's in the pant. But it doesn't appear that that's the case in the community. Is it that we can hide this in the community? The reality is hidden from us.
It depends where you are, and I thought you, at the beginning, when you introduced the topic, you mentioned that the social class plays an element as well. So if you're in London, mixed marriages isn't really a big issue. You see mixed relationships all the time as well.
Because that's very cosmopolitan.
Very cosmopolitan, and the higher the socio-economic background, more professionals, it's more acceptable there as well. But it is still a taboo subject, because as you also mentioned as well, on the other side, you've got Shadi.com and websites that are based on your caste background are thriving at the moment, because people are reaching back to their caste identity as a form.
Could they be illegal under the caste legislation?
No, it wouldn't. And I think everybody should have the right to marry who they want to. And if they've been through, you know, generations, followed a certain background and, you know, so-called social caste, and that's what they perceive themselves to be, they have every right to do that.
Well, let me ask you a direct question, and others can pick this up, yeah? If somebody says, I want to marry into my caste or into my racial category, yeah? Is that racist? Is that person racist?
Not at all. I think you've got every right. At the end of the day, we have dual heritages in this country as well. And if you want to pass that on to your offspring, and you know, if you want to pass on your language and your culture and your background, it's your right to. And you shouldn't be forcing anybody to go into a mixed marriage if they don't want to. It's your preference and it's your choice to do that. And I think this royal marriage is very significant. For me, I had mixed emotions. In one sense, I was quite angry about it.
Okay.
And then on the other sense, it was kind of this romantic idealism.
Why were you angry then?
Well, I was angry about it because, as you know, great as the Queen is, I'm not a monarchist, and you know the role that she plays. I thought we were getting ready for the position to have the discussion about the abolition of monarchy, and they've played a masterstroke here. Because if you look at Meghan, not only is she of mixed background, she is older than Harry, and she's a divorcee as well.
Absolutely.
And that's quite revolutionary before the royal family to, and they are, you could argue that they're representing modern Britain, which they are, but the way they're very flexible and they're very embracing, and it just shows you that they are thinking ahead for their own survival as well.
Yeah.
Some people worry about mixed families. Why do you think is that?
What's the fear?
What's the fear behind it?
Well, as someone who is in a mixed...
Especially families,
I am in a mixed marriage. We've been married 24 years now, and I think the fear, certainly in my experience, is a dilution of the religion, a dilution of our community, and some fear around identity. What is the future generation going to be? Because I think we're so socialised, as you were talking earlier about people's rights to choose. I think we're actually socialised to think that actually we should marry a person of a certain race, of a certain caste, etc. And to a certain extent, we don't question that. And I think when it comes to, especially for women, I think, who particularly Punjabi women, Asian women, who do marry in mixed relationships, we're challenging some of those patriarchal norms around what is expected of us. It is expected that we do as our parents and as our elders say. We marry, and particularly because we are more policed in terms of.
So when you're saying we, are you talking about women? Do you think the different standards for men and women?
Absolutely.
Because you've done your research in this.
Yes, and but I think what's interesting is that those fears, I believe, are not valid. And I think if we look back in our history, we're very mixed anyway. If you look at India history, you know, northern India is very, very different in terms of heritage to southern India. And I think some of the myths, I think, dare I say, is to do with some of the sorts of sociological research that's kind of, so for example with my daughter, I was busy cooking one day and she suddenly said to me, "Mum, I can never imagine having two parents of the same race." And it just completely threw me. So I said, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And so I said, "Well, how do you feel? Do you not feel stuck in the middle?" She says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Dad's heritage is white, kind of middle class, etc."
Because it can be confusing for the children.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to. And she said, "No, that sounds utterly stupid." And I said, "Well, that's what sociologists were kind of."
Well, what maybe you're saying then, we can come back to that, is whether we're creating new identities and new kind of ethnic
and new norms. New norms. That's her norm.
But I want to come, Geraldine. Of course, we all know that the human race is mixed, and we all come from Africa.
Absolutely.
People who think that they came from a village in Punjab. No. All human beings, all the genetic research, all the anthropological research saying that the human race came out of Africa and then it came from the warm climates and then went to. Even white people were black one day. So, but we know that. But it's a question of identity, and identity is formed around how people draw, as Stuart Hall said, certain lines in history. And so if we look at, say, the black people in America and Caribbean, because they were forcibly taken as slaves, and then often the women were subject to rape. So a lot of mixed offspring were from those kind of experiences, and you can imagine why then there was a kind of negativity towards that.
And if you, like you say, if you probably look at the history of my family, and we're mixed, and I'm not suggesting all of it was through violence, but some of it
violence plays a role, doesn't it?
Through violence, some of it was through choice, and I think some of those patterns have continued in the UK for a whole host of reasons. I suppose I wanted to come back to something that Kindy said. I think how we construct our identities is really important, and we draw on many factors. But then I suppose the fear is also how identity is constructed externally for us too. So no matter how much I will say that I'm a black woman, I'm an academic, I'm a mother,
I'm an individual,
and all of these things, there are certain places and spaces I go where my only identity is that I'm a black woman. So it's that challenge between how we as individuals construct our identities and then how identities are constructed to us. So if there was anything about the news we've had this week about the marriage in the spring, it's how their very union is put up as an indicator of progress and change, and that public discourse I'd like to dismiss. So I think it's the challenge, Gurnham, how do we mediate between how we ourselves construct our identity and how our identity is constructed for us.
So Kindy, sorry, I want to go back to you. What are the advantages of mix for the children? Like you know,
we talk about disadvantages.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's many, right down to food. Yeah, the different. So my kids know about parotas as well as roast dinners, that kind of thing. And I think it's also, I think for me it's about the representation of, when we talk about diversity and multicultural and things like that, I think mixed marriages are, to a certain extent, an epitome of that. So my kids, they can Bhangra dance, and they know how to go punting on the River Cam in Cambridge. So that
they
is
got
a reflection.
both the best.
Well, I think so, yes. And I think there isn't a confusion, not in my experience, of mixed race children or dual heritage children, but I think there's certainly a celebration and knowing that actually they have a multitude of religions, cultures, food, dress, music that they are at ease with, and and their lives are completely fluid. It's not a case of they have to fit into this box because they're not allowed to fit in this box.
But the important thing there is skin colour.
That's what I was going to come to, Jelaline. It was what's the disadvantages?
Because I think they do. I think they still do feed into that hierarchy of what
fair skin, less fair skin.
Well, you can go in any community, so, you get questioned by that. Oh, she's dark skinned, she's light, and she's middle, so or even, you get picked on those. So even though we've got an increase in dual heritage children, and they're the largest growing group. That doesn't eliminate the fact that they then are positioned within an hierarchy, irrespective of how they construct their own individual identity. They're concerned about the hair as well.
Times we've got 4.5 minutes to break time, so if you want to come in, yes.
मैं थोड़ी पंजाबी च गल भी करनी देखो साडे एक तां गुरु साहब ने बड़ी सोहनी गल कही है मानस की जात एक पहचान
हां जी
अव्वल अल्लाह नूर पाया कुदरत के सब बंदे
जी ਅਸੀਂ ਪਛਾਣ ਗਏ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਆ
point is that Guru Sahib, he was so progressive at the time.
But ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਵੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਫੈਮਲੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ they remained within their own family.
I agree.
So there's a social and an ideal.
I agree. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਕਟਿਵ ਦੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚੀ ਕਿਉਂ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਾਸਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਧਰਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ I think we as human beings we are very protective of our sperms and genes and eggs. I think that's what the one instinct is.
So there's a natural tendency to stay within your group.
The people who have come out from that, because they are always in a minority, either to do with religion, people who are, for example, do not believe in any God or anything, or people who are stuttering, or people who are left-handed, or people who have a different sexual orientation. They're always looked down upon. So I think that's because the majority try to keep their rule and try to impose their value system on them. So I think that's what the stigma is. So the stigma.
Why do you think they do that? Why do you think they do that?
I think because they think they're right, because they're in majority. But again, Panji, if you try to find the civilization.
Is it about themselves, about their self-insecurity?
I think probably that's the reason, because this is what Hitler was trying to do. So I think we need to look at, because this is very important, that those people they have also right, and also ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ civilization ਦੇਖ ਲੈ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਸਭਿਅਤਾ ਕੋਈ civilized ਹੈਗੀ ਆ we always look how the majority treat the minorities. That's the way forward.
We're going to break a couple of minutes. You wanted to come in, yeah.
2 points I had, and I think, Kindy, I was fascinated with the things you were saying. The greatest benefit that a mixed racial relationship has is that they're happy. I know so many people that have gone with their parents' decision and married in the caste, and they live unhappy life. You know,
you've been doing research. Are they happy? Are they happy? I mean, isn't that just as problematic as saying that?
I mean, what sort of percentage? Have you got the number, or?
Well, what I know in terms of percentage of mixed race dual heritage children is that since 2001, if you look at the census, 2001 to 2011, the percentage of mixed race children grew by 85%.
So there's an exponential
increase. Huge number. So it's a phenomenon that we have to reckon, if you like. It's something that we're facing in our communities, whether it's mixed race, mixed faith.
But Ravi, now I want to come back to you, Ravi, because if I can, I mean, whilst we're not going to make any judgments about families, because
obviously not. No.
But the truth is, still, the majority of people, if they're desirable, is the default, isn't it? I mean, whether it's caste or whether it's
religion or whatever,
their aspirations are if we can stay within, and it's not as if people are planning to marry out. Yeah,
you're imprinted as a child to your father, your mother, and you're naturally inclined to be in a relationship that represents that because it's familiar, it's
fear
warm,
of change,
and it's understanding. But it's up to you. I mean, we said that race is socially constructed as well. You could say black, and black's very different across the whole world. If you look at Australia, Africa, and the Americas as well. I mean, Geraldine, the point that you made, I find fascinating as well. If you look at South America, Latin America, how all of these communities and countries have sprung up where you had the slave communities that were brought in that were then mixed.
There's still a hierarchy.
It is. You've got mulattoes.
There's still a big, white face,
and this is what you have.
Country.
You have mulattoes, and at the bottom you have blacks. Then at the top you've got whites and all the mix. So there is a racial hierarchy that is being played out here. And one thing I found very interesting this week was the silence of one of the most powerful men in the world, Donald Trump, who didn't say nothing on this issue.
I'll pause you on there because we're going for a short break. As you can see, we've just started the discussion. We're half time. So many issues, but after the break, we will take some calls, but short ones. We're not so that we can get more in, and we'll pick these issues up again. So, break the बाद जोड़ते हैं फतेह बुलाओ वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह
106 ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੇਖੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਅਕਾਲ ਚੈਨਲ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕੋਨੇ ਤੋਂ ਲਾਈਵ ਜਾਂ ਡੀ ਲਾਈਵ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਟੈਕਨੋਲੋਜੀ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਹੈ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਹਾਈ ਡੈਫੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਕਵਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇਗਾ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਪੈਗਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਘਰ-ਘਰ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਕਰਵਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਸੰਪਰਕ ਕਰੋ 07702748906 ਤੇ।
ਅਕਾਲ ਚੈਨਲ ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ। ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। once again welcome to the one show। ਅੱਜ ਦੇ one show ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਵਿਸ਼ੇਸ਼ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਲਿਆ। ਉਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਗਨ ਮਾਰਕਲ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਵੀ ਦਿਖਾਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਇੱਕ ਅਫਰੀਕਨ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਲੜਕੀ ਜਿਸ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸ ਹੈਰੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵਿਆਹ ਹੋਣ ਦਾ ਇਰਾਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਅਗਲੇ ਸਾਲ ਹੋਣਾ ਔਰ ਬੜੀ ਚਰਚਾ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਬੜਾ ਡਿਸਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਰਾਇਲ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਨੇ ਏਡੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਸਟੈਪ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਵੀ ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਾਇਲ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਜਾਤ ਜਾਂ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਇੱਕ ਨਸਲ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਨਜੀਤ ਕਈ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਜੋ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੈਸ ਡਾਇਨਾ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਵੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਕਦਮ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਸੀ she did push the boundaries and this is and the Harry's been influenced by Princess Diana as well. But actually if you look under the surface it's not quite as revolutionary as you might think.
I think Diana was a bit more naive, I think, when she got married to Charles.
Well, actually, if you look at Meghan
is a quite strong, powerful
she's strong,
woman.
but she's also, I mean, her background is hardly working class. I know that when it was announced, the Sun was running this campaign that, she's from a gangster background. And gangsters, straight from that. But actually, it's
funny, isn't it, how people label
but actually,
communities.
So her mother is from a mixed background, although, Doris Ragland, although, and she's a social worker, so big on the social workers, yeah. She's also a psychotherapist and yoga instructor, so that tells you something about. Yeah. And her father is from Dutch, English, Irish descent. But this is interesting. From the age of 5, she was educated all the time in private schools. So she's received a private education. She's
had a very good education.
Yeah, graduated from Chicago, Northwestern University, and she did theatre and international studies. But what's really interesting is the conditions upon which this marriage was allowed. And one of them was the
conditions. What the royals put on her? You mean?
Well, I don't know how they did it, but
right. Okay.
but it was announced that she would be baptised and confirmed into the Church of England before the wedding. Apparently, she's a Protestant, but probably lapsed. So this is a bit like our kind of campaigners that were saying no if you become a Sikh, then you can get married. So even the royal family insisted that she wasn't as mixed as might be the case. The other interesting thing was, on the positive side, was that I don't know. Remember when Prince Charles wanted to marry what's her name? Camilla. They said no, she can't because she's divorced. Yeah. Well, Meghan's divorced, and apparently that hasn't raised the issue. But if you go back to 1936 and Edward and Mrs. Simpson, he had to actually give up the crown if he wanted to marry a divorcee. So, whilst Geraldine, there is some kind of movement forward, there's still this kind of caution, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's always the same. We have lots of discussions that, as much as I wouldn't suggest that things don't change, things do change, but things don't often change as much
slowly
as we think they change. And even if we think about the discussion we had just before the break, in terms of the increasing number of dual heritage children, all the structural inequalities still prevail.
So the racism is still there.
So the racism is still there. I will argue more explicit in the last.
But she'll be protected from structural inequality because she's can marry the richest family in the world. We've got a call. We'll take calls and we'll bring in the people as well. Hello.
सारे अकाल चंद को प्यार में सत श्री अकाल मैं सिंधु बोलना ग्रीनफील्ड तो 40 मिनट से तो गल में
अच्छा पाजी फोन कॉल ਕੱਟ ਦੋ ਇਹ ਵਿਸ਼ਾ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਾ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਨੋਟ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਕਰੋ ਕਿਹਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਲੈਣੀ ਕਿਹਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈਣੀ
ਔਰ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੇਵ ਯੂਰ ਮਨੀ ਔਨ
ਰੱਖਿਆ ਕਰੋ ਗੱਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ if you should try apply for a job on a Akaal channel and have your own program because he just phones in on a completely different topic.
Okay. I think one or two issues which came out from Kulwinder's discussion. ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦਾ ਲਾਟੂ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਔਰਤ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਘੁੰਮਦਾ ਹੈ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਕੰਟੈਕਸਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੇ ਜੇ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਕੁੜੀ ਨੇ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਜਾਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾ ਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕੁੜੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਲੈ ਤੇਰਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਨਾਤਾ ਟੁੱਟ ਗਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਦੂਸਰਾ ਜੇ ਕਾਕਾ ਜੀ ਛਿੰਦਾ ਪੁੱਤ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾ ਲਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਐਕਸੈਪਟੇਬਲ ਹੈ ਚਾਹੇ ਗੋਰੀ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਾ ਲਵੇ ਤੇ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਕਰਾ ਲਵੇ ਉਹ ਐਕਸੈਪਟੇਬਲ ਆ दूसरी यानी कि जी डबल हिपोक्रेसी है वो ये है जो काका जी कच्चे है इस मुल्क में अजे पक्के नहीं हुए इमीग्रेशन के थ्रू उदों जी मर्जी काली हो गोरी हो अन्नी हो लूली हो लंगड़ी हो फिर जिन्ना मर्जी ब्याह कराओ तो फिर एक्सैप्टेबल है तो उदों यानी कि एज का भी कोई फर्क नहीं रखा जाता भावें वो 60 साल की हो काका भावें 20 साल का हो तो फिर भी
ये गल करते मैं जिथे तुसीं हुण गल करदे जिहड़े इत्थे दे मुंडे आ
हाँ जी
ਉਹ ਵਿਆਹ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੀ ਕੁੜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਗਰਲਫ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਵੀ ਰੱਖੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
Rafi, so there's a lot of hypocrisy around.
It is.
There's one thing as a principled objection, but then there's this kind of dual standards that people often apply.
It's clear, and it's the elephant in the room. Whenever you look at, from my view experience of the South Asian Punjabi community, the dual kind of hypocrisy that they have. One point I wanted to make is the power of this as well. I remember reading a book by Dr. Ambedkar who had written lots about this, and he wrote about in the Indian village when you had somebody who died, it was insisted that if the male died that the woman would burn herself at the funeral pyres. And Dr. Ambedkar said one of the reasons for sati was to preserve the caste identity and the hierarchy, because if that woman went out and married outside a caste, then the structure would come down. So by marrying out a caste, it is a revolutionary act. And marrying out a race, it is in that sense, it can make a change. But it's also the oppression and discrimination that society fosters upon you as well. So all the discussion this week in the media about her background, who she is, well, why shouldn't she? At the end of the day, she's a princess in her own right.
We've got another call, so we'll get a call, then we'll come back to Kim here.
Hello.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਭਾਜੀ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਜੀ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਾਮ ਦੱਸੋ।
ਮੈਂ ਬਲਦੇਵ ਬੋਲ ਰਹੀ ਹਾਂ ਰੇਡਿੰਗ ਤੋਂ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਮੈਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ the children of the mixed marriages, they are very intelligent children. Did you notice that that's the point you missed? I don't know whether because they're bringing up as different, and they come from two cultures, and they are very intelligent children. The children of the mixed marriages.
I would like to put that question to Kindi, because you can answer this question. Are your children intelligent? And the thing is,
daughter's at Cambridge.
Thank you very much.
Your daughter's at Cambridge, so she must be intelligent.
Thank you, Khalsa.
I wouldn't subscribe to saying that mixed race children, dual heritage children are naturally...
I want to interrupt you. She said they are different. Now, I don't know what does that mean to you.
Well, let's about the intelligence first.
Yes.
Okay. I wouldn't subscribe to that.
There's no evidence for that either.
No, I think you know, if you have the resources, you know, where your both parents may be in professions, and you can provide opportunities for your children, take them to the library, take them to.
That'll be with any parent.
That will be with any.
It's all that kind, and who you may introduce your children to, all that kind of stuff. That's what supports a child's development. So I don't think because Tom is my husband and I'm, you know, the kid's mother and Tom's their dad, that's because of who we are, that our kids are
it's about
bright.
Individuals.
Yes.
Geraldine, one thing I wanted to bring up, because I know that amongst African Caribbean, actually now I read that the mixed category is actually surpassed now. So you're more likely to be in a mixed family than in a non-mixed family. And I also know that there was something about how African Caribbean men, there was some research saying that they prefer to have white women. Is that to do with internalized racism, or what was all that about?
I've not come across the stuff, but I have heard people saying that. I think, is it internalized racism? I think sometimes we're socialized in this country, and we spend time in places where we meet people outside our communities. I think there is something about class, increasingly so, that you can see probably in people in more affluent, people with more socioeconomic position, probably more likely to be in mixed relationships. So I think there's loads of contradictions, and there are loads of reasons why people do it. Maybe for some it could be internalized racism, maybe for others maybe they just meet someone, they love them and they date white people, black people.
But attitudes have changed, haven't they?
It could be a whole host of things. I don't think it's any one.
I mean, I'm thinking about say 30 years ago, I mentioned earlier on that if you had mixed race people were not seen in the same light, there was a bit of a stigma, but now with Beyonce and Meghan Markle, they're almost like front cover now, isn't it?
I just think we've been here a bit long now, so I think, you know, we started coming over in larger numbers, this wave in the 50s, and men sometimes travelled alone without wives. So there's a whole issue of migration and settlement.
Does it goes down to
and all of those sorts of factors.
Does it goes down to what is beautiful and pure?
I
think that's why back to what Gern says about, for some it may be something associated with that.
Because it goes
racism
in every community. This is what happens.
Arishta, that's a good point. If you watch a Bollywood movie, all fair-skinned heroines, even the narrative sometimes is where there's an intercaste marriage, interreligious marriage, and people go and watch that. And is it back to the Cinderella story?
I think not only that, जैसे पंजाबी कल्चर ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ, ਸਾਡੀ ਕੁੜੀ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੋਰੀ ਚਿੱਟੀ ਆ, ਸਾਡੀ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਆ, ਗੋਰੀ ਚਿੱਟੀ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਗੋਰੇ ਚਿੱਟੇ ਰੰਗ ਨੂੰ
ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ,
ਰੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਨਗਮਾਨ ਕਰੀ ਫਲਾਣੀ ਤੇ ਗਾਣੀ, ਸਾਡੇ ਫਿਲਮਾਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਗਾਣੇ गोरे रंग ਨੂੰ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਪ੍ਰੈਫਰ
what is that? Internalized racism? What is
absolutely
why do they prefer there's skin whitening creams as well?
Absolutely. ਮੈਂ ਉਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਕਟ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਚੋਰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਕਾਲਾ ਚੋਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਲੈਕ ਕਲਰ ਹੈਗਾ it is very considered very derogatory and I think I was reading sometimes the word black has got about more than 60 negative connotations to that. So I think ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਕਲਚਰ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਲੈਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਕਲੀਫ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਪਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਲਚਰ ਵਿੱਚ
the Moondavasis, the original people of India, were black people.
Absolutely.
You know, they are black people.
They are
Dalits, South India.
Indigenous people are black, jet black, purple black.
Yeah.
But they're a very mixed community today because when you had different tribes coming in, different empires, different communities.
But why the negativity towards blackness within South Asian community then?
There is
if we were originally black.
There's a global racial hierarchy which is permeating every country now. It's a pyramid where you've got, you know, blue-eyed, blonde, white at the top, and at the bottom you've got jet black African, and then you've got the different types.
So is Meghan escaping? Is this an escape?
Yeah, well, she's the acceptable face.
She's acceptable.
Blackness as
But
well,
say if she'd been jet black, if she'd been jet black, would she have been?
That's the question, isn't it?
Would she be in this position?
I mean, if she'd been darker, would she be where she's?
And one thing I say is look at how Obama was received compared to Michelle. And I think Michelle was a driving force between that partnership, and she was amazing. But the way the media picked on them was awful. And I mentioned this point earlier before about Trump not saying anything about this marriage. He could have turned around and said,
he might tweet you.
He could have said, what a great movement, you know, for unity across the world. But instead, he tweeted some vicious, you know, saying these are the enemy, these are the people we don't want to be. And that says volumes about them and who's acceptable and who isn't.
Have we seen the backlash? I mean, we're talking about, you know, these cosmopolitan families. You know, you mentioned London, you go there, it's such a melting pot. But we're also seeing a retreat as well, aren't we? You know, we've got rise of religious fundamentalism across the world. Hindutva, they want to reinstate caste, you know, solidify it. So are we seeing what's going on? And Trump with his recent stuff about Muslims?
Yeah, and I think this is a political backdrop of more conservative political discourse that we're living in. And I think if you look at what happened in Leamington, in the Gurdwara in Leamington, where that couple were trying to get married and their marriage was sabotaged, and it was no sense of respect for that couple, but it was this fueling of this religious righteousness.
Although just to put just at the other side, I mean, I think some of those protesters were arguing that we're not against inter-race marriages. For them, it was to do with that there should be religious, you know, kind of sanctity to the religious place. That's what they were arguing. And interesting, Meghan Markle herself is going to get baptised before she's actually going to be allowed. So some progress, but
some progress, but often not
lots
as much
of issues.
as the media sometimes would like us to believe. And interracial marriages are not an indicator of progress, and I think that's probably what. And I think we are living in a time where you've got white supremacism really trying to get a hold on.
I think the other point I just want to add to that is that traditions, they die very hard. It takes many years. You can make a law, but traditions actually die very hard. The other thing is very interesting.
But we already said, if we look at Punjab, we from Punjab. Punjabi culture is very mixed culture.
Yeah, it is.
But those, you know, partition, that was important marker. So the hatred.
Absolutely.
It's to do with those political events.
Even Janai in case he was a Muslim, but he married to a Hindu woman. Krishna Bhagwan di bhi je gal kariye, he was a black guy. But wo Bhagwan siga ye is karke uno accept kar liya.
And Nehru, of course, was having an affair with
but I think so the point I'm making is I think we have got a very double standard. Acha us to bina jehdi so called higher caste bhi hega, bhi je koi Brahman kale rang da hega to un gane andale bhi o tode mathe lagna chahiye. So I think got a lot of stereotypes in our own culture.
But what all the examples you've given is where men have married out.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a completely different ball game when women transgress some of those.
Maharaj, did you sing? He had how many wives from all kinds of backgrounds?
About 8 or 9, I don't know.
No, 12 women actually died with him when he died.
But he had Maharaja, I was reading about Maharaja Patiala Papinder Singh. He had lots. So somehow it's all right for the royals to kind of indulge in these things, but not for the commoners.
It is, and like I said, this system of hatred and oppression, it's targeted the family unit for a long time. So, you know, if you look at the black family as well, some of my friends are saying, you know, it's about time we had some positive role models and a strong family unit because of the history of slavery and the oppression of the 60s
the
and
negative,
70s.
you want the positive.
And then we mentioned before, as soon as somebody's famous or got a bit of money, all of a sudden mixed marriages come into it. And, you know, why is it that when somebody makes some money, all of a sudden, and some of my friends do say that, is like, you know, you make a bit of money and that's it, you'll have the blonde woman coming to you and try to court you and the rest of it. So I think it is a power structure thing here, and it is, it is a gender issue as well, but it works both ways as well. So if you look at the villages in India where you've got, you know, poor people who want to get married, and then you've got the pressure of dowry, and then if it is a mixed caste marriage as well, the villagers and the family can take it out, and there's often death and killing as well. If somebody wants to have pride in the marriage, they're not allowed to wear turbans or allowed to ride on a donkey or you know, anything like that that gives somebody a bit of pride and respect. So I would say there is the hypocrisy where power structures and when it's male-orientated have done what they wanted to, like leaders, Maharaja Ranjit Singh as well. But I think in the modern context, we have to be very careful and how we are.
Geraldine, I mean, you and I have read about Malcolm X and his autobiography, and Malcolm X's mother. I say that because Malcolm X was the guy who talked about black is beautiful and about reclaiming.
And he came to Marshall Street here in Smethwick. He came to Marshall Street here in Smethwick, a week before he died.
The Indian Work Association. But Malcolm's mother was almost white. But she was the victim of her rape. She was a product of her father, I think, was a slave owner. But because she was politically conscious, then when she chose to marry, because she wanted to re-blacken, she chose the blackest man she could find to marry him.
But families are political, aren't they, if we think about it? So the descriptions you've given is that we often don't think about the politics of families and family life. And families are where we are nurtured and socialised and where we get our strength and all of those things. So I think what we need to think about is like the family in terms of that, in that political sense as well.
It's interesting that...
And I agree with you. I think the black family is often pathologised, but people forget there was never ever a black family form. We've always had a diversity of family forms, but then it's easy to sort of pathologise our family.
Okay, we've got another caller on the line, so let's see. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਾਂ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ
ਮੈਂ ਨਾਮ you know my name is Tiwari.
Ji Tiwari ji, what would you like to say about today's discussion?
I just wanted to say that this what one show is. What does it mean to clarify the definition of one show?
One show. Well, it's from the Ek Onkar. It's the Manus Ki Jat Sab Ek Pehchan, the unity of all humanity. The unity of all humanity.
That's not topic to discuss.
We are not discussing. No, I know what Omkar is, but we are not discussing Omkar.
Well, we're discussing social issues.
No, social issues. I know on your left-hand side, these people sitting there, on right hand side there. I know, but there is no maturity of the show.
I think this guy. Okay.
I think.
I mean, this is not really a religious show.
No, it isn't. It's a social issue show.
One show is one topic anyway.
But anyway, but I think this is interesting because actually we haven't had a lot of callers, and I think that's because it's a very difficult subject.
It's a very intellectual topic as well.
Yeah, and
delicate.
But how do families deal with these issues? Do they try to, sweep into the carpet?
Well, if you look at the experiences of Dalits in this country who have married out of caste, often they are isolated and they are rejected from the family of the so-called upper caste. So many young girls that have fallen in love out of caste, they're rejected. And what's the word again?
So it always goes down to the girls, not the boy. So is this okay if the boys?
The boy is not accepted.
It works. It depends. In each circumstance is different. But what you find then is that they're isolated. They're by themselves. 5-10 years go by. They have children, and then the parents come back to it, and they slowly start to accept it.
That's one of the issues, isn't it? They often say, Harish, so they'll say, nothing wrong with the couple, but the children, we won't be able to marry them off.
ਪਿੰਡਾਂ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ ਛੋਟੇ ਟ੍ਰਾਈਬਸ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਆਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਹੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਿਕਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਗਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਵੀ ਹੈਵ ਨਾਟ ਐਕਸਪੈਂਡਡ ਆਵਰ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ ਐਟ ਹੋਲ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਵਿਆਹ ਤੇ ਸੱਦਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਹਸ਼-ਹਸ਼ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਪਿੱਠ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ ਫਲਾਨੀ ਜਾਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨੇ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾ ਲਿਆ ਫਲਾਨੀ ਜਾਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁੜੀ ਨਾਲ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾ ਲਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਦਿਲੋਂ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਬਸ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਲੈ ਵੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਰਾ ਲੈਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਦੇ ਵਿਲ ਗੋ ਟੂ ਰਜਿਸਟਰੀ ਐਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿਲ ਗੈਟ ਮੈਰਿਡ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਲੈ ਵੀ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੀ ਪੈਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੇ ਕਈ ਕਿਸੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਕੇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੂੰ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਮਰ ਗਈਆਂ ਆ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ 1000 ਰੁਪਇਆ ਦੇਤਾ 1000 ਪਾਉਂਡ ਦੇਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਤੂੰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਕਰਨਾ ਬਣੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਬੱਚਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ they start accepting them slowly and slowly.
But that's no good because it's too late then and they move on with their life.
ਹੈਰਾਨਗੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਰਾਨਗੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ मैं समझ लिया भी इस गल ने इन्ना लोगों ਨੂੰ ਦੁੱਖ ਤੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਕਰ ਵੂਮਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅੰਸ਼ੋਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝ ਲਿਆ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਦਰਿਆ ਭਰ ਗਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਬੜਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਦਿੱਤਾ
I mean Rish, you know, I think we all kind of professionals here. And in some senses, you know, we need the community, but we can live without the community. But I think, you know, a lot of people need the community. They need those networks and the support, and that's often the pressure on them. That if they, the brotherly or whatever, if they go against the brother, they'll get outcast. That word outcast is used. So you can understand where those mothers, I mean, your own parents, you know, I'm sure that they didn't welcome what you did with, you know, with fanfare. Quite the opposite, you know. And you can understand
it was difficult, and I think what we need to remember is that if children are born, they pay the consequences as well.
Absolutely.
And I think particularly, I come back to the gendered issue again, I think particularly women can pay a high price for choosing to lead their life in a particular way. And then following on from that, what we don't talk enough about is the consequences that children play. So when they hear things that are said to me, you know, whether I'm at a dinner party or whatever, and somebody says to me, well, obviously you didn't have an arranged marriage, you know, or to whether they themselves get questioned whether it's about their skin colour, or whether it's assumption that they're white, or what have your grandparents said about your mum, this kind of thing, then it's that they have to face it as well. And I think sometimes we forget that actually, we as I mentioned earlier, we have this huge number of young people that are mixed race, but actually we should be thinking of what kind of society that we as adults are laying down for them to feel that it's okay for them to have a mixed heritage, and not just them as children, but other children who perhaps don't come from dual heritage, and how they relate to their peers.
I was just going to say that, you know, when they say you marry an outsider and you're going to leave your community, did you leave your community? That's what they say in families. Oh, in a car jana, they're going to abandon the community. Have you abandoned your community?
I didn't abandon my community. I didn't abandon my identity. I mean, what's very interesting is sometimes our circumstances take effect in our lives. I mean, in my life, I was my kind of whereabouts were very controlled. You know, I went to work and I came home and that was it. So the fears that people have about their daughters going out, etc., are imagined, right? So in my reality was that my boss sent me to go and speak to this person in another department to ask him about an artificial intelligence project, and that person I then ended up marrying 7-8 years down the line. So was I expecting that? No. What I was expecting was to have an arranged marriage.
Geraldine, I mean, this is a real issue because, you know, in schools we teach against racism, and I know that we're saying that to choose to marry within your own racial may not be seen as racism, but in another way it might be seen as because you're using racial markers I mean, it could be if the way we teach it. And so children are confused often because the parents might be saying, no, you've got to follow this path. But they're saying, actually, the faith says that we shouldn't make distinctions, and also we've been taught that we shouldn't make. So there is, young people are trapped, aren't they, between loyalties to community and.
Yeah, I think so, and you know, I'm quite conscious of that with my children, and particularly my son who's 23, and so I'm mindful when we are talking about issues at home, and we have these sort of conversations all the time. I think it's really important. And I think that's why the family is important, because it builds resilience as well, doesn't it, really? It builds resistance and equip kids to try and deal with it. But I think it's just a whole host of contradictions, Gurnham, and I think I can understand why people want to remain within communities. I'm a community activist as well as an academic. I believe that, you know, communities and families help to move things forward and make progress. But I also appreciate and respect people have freedom of choice, and individuals have the right to choose who they love and so forth. But these things sometimes just create a lot of tensions.
I think because ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਤਾਂ personal values ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, and there are some community values ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ. I think the concept of ijat is constantly changing, and it's very difficult for people to accept a change, any kind of change. If someone asks me to stand on my head, I think it will be difficult for me. So I think the change to accept takes some time. एक जन के पंजाबी दा बहुत बड़ा पोइट साडा सुरजीत पात्र वो कहंदा मैं राहां ते नहीं तुरदा मैं तुरदा हां ते राह बनदे ने. Whenever you start a new thing, a new path, people actually have to follow you in a different way.
I have to stop here. I just want, this is a very important question. You can answer it or you don't have to answer it. Did you want to marry in your community or you didn't? What was the reason behind it?
What, that I wanted to marry in my community?
Like in,
yeah. Well, I think, as I was saying
what was
earlier,
the reason that stopped you from marrying out of, you know, the community?
I fell in love with someone.
No, but what was the reasons? I mean, what's different about the boys? Like, what's so different?
I think, as Dr. Harish was saying earlier, that there's different standards for if women choose to marry out, that they are often isolated from their family, they're told never to darken our doors again, whereas if the boys are choose to marry somebody of a different faith, whatever, it's more accepted. And they may face some resistance within the family, but not to the same extent. And I think that's where some of the issues do come about. But also I think we have to face those sorts of things in our community. If, for example, Professor Gill has just done some research this year.
Aisha Gill,
Aisha Gill, who... And they spoke to young people, and young men very openly said, okay, I'll do as my parents say, I'll marry this person, but actually I'm still going to have my mistress as well. So if young women are seeing that happening in their families, then what does that say about the gender inequality in our community, and how those women grow up to respect men as well?
We are just the last 3 minutes, and I want to give everybody a chance to sum up. But Ravi, the truth is that this question is confronting every family within every community, white communities, Caribbean communities,
every community,
Muslim, Sikh. It's one of the biggest issues, I think, and that's maybe because we live in this very multimedia world. People mix more, yet the community somehow fear even talking about it, and then we get crisis situations. I mean, should we be having programs? I mean, some people might say that we're encouraging this. It's not a question of encouraging or not, it's facing reality, isn't it?
Personally, I think it's the issues that Kindy has raised about the gender discrimination, disparities, differences. We should be having discussions about racism and the impact that has, and the things that we have more in unity, instead of saying, well, it's good to be in a mixed relationship or mixed racial marriage and that's what you should do, because then you're going the other way as well. And I think we should give people the choice to make informed decisions.
Yes, that's right, give them a choice.
Without fear and prejudice, and be able to live happy, fulfilling lives where they're contributing citizens to the community that they live in. But what we do is we force feed them from day one. You're this and this is who you're going to marry. Don't go over there. We don't like these people. They're different from us. They're beneath us. And you're just, creating fear, paranoia, and you're contributing to discrimination in society. So what we should be doing is to be targeting this and saying what we don't want is discrimination. It's unacceptable. What we want to do is focus on the unity amongst us and look at the greatness that we as human beings can contribute to, instead of saying, the status quo, which has brought us to where we are.
Last 2 minutes, what advice are you going to give Meghan Markle? 30 seconds. What advice are you going to give her?
I think advice is very clear. We are born free and will die free. And leave your faculties open to learn so many things in this life. And we should accept, we need to eradicate our own prejudices, which we have got against many people, and do not label anyone.
Geraldine, what advice have you got for Meghan Markle?
Well, I don't know, actually. Just
don't get married.
No, get married.
No, she's happy for them to get married.
But at the same time, you've been put in a position and you have a responsibility, rightly or wrongly. And whilst I don't see you as an indicator of progress, you have been put in a position, and that comes with some responsibility to everyone.
Kindy, one sentence, because we've only got a minute left.
Sorry.
One sentence.
I would say be happy and don't forget where you come from. Absolutely, and pass that on to the next generation.
Yes, never forget where you come from. That's very important. And the thing is, I'm very happy for the couple.
Absolutely, yeah. Malcolm X said that a people without a knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots.
There you are.
So never forget where you're coming from, but be adventurous in terms of where you're going.
Definitely.
And you'll be happy and the world will be a better place. So we've scratched the surface today, difficult issues, and hopefully that we've allowed the community and families to have a dialogue. You know, we don't know where our lives will end up.
In every marriage, you have challenges.
That's right.
So you have to face them.
So ਇੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਪਲ ਝੁਕ ਮਾਫ ਕਰਨੀ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
ਬੋਲੇ ਸੋਨੇ ਹਾਲ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ
ਅਕਾਲ ਚੈਨਲ ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ